Kindly tell us where you are watching from, as we bring you another epic story. The floor of the police cell was rough and unforgiving, a coarse enemy to the fragile dignity Madame Hugo had always carried like a precious head tie. She was weeping now, not the loud, performative weeping of a wronged woman, but a silent, gut-wrenching shudder that made her body tremble in the chilly corner. Outside the metal door, the wails of her daughter, Amara, sounded like a lost spirit. This was the place where all their laughter had finally died. Every single person who had promised her protection, the fat councilman, the smooth-talking bank manager, the uniformed officer she used to tip heavily, were now just faces on a list that would not answer the phone. The true terror was the realization that the concrete of this cell was more reliable than the friendships they had built on borrowed gold and shallow promises. She looked at her trembling hands, manicured and expensive, now smeared with grime. She knew, deep in the pit of her stomach, that the crisis they faced was not about money or connections, it was about the lack of simple, honest worth. The memory of the last 36 hours was a confusing blur, the sudden raid, the cold formality of the Economic Crimes Unit, the confiscation of phones and documents. It all stemmed from that greedy land deal, the one her associate, Chief Baco, had assured her was completely clean. Chief Baco, the man who was supposed to be Amara's wealthy, saving grace, was gone, fled to another country, leaving them as the only remaining targets. The charge was serious, conspiracy and grand fraud related to public land. The fine print of the law was a cruel, mocking voice that echoed in the silence. Madame Hugo tried to pray, but the words felt hollow. Her mind kept drifting back to the small, dusty shop on the edge of the market, and the quiet man who carved wood as if he were carving his own soul. If only they had treated the poor carpenter with kindness, perhaps the ancestors would not have allowed this crushing weight to fall upon them now. She closed her eyes, wishing to trade all her designer clothes for one moment of genuine, saving influence. Kelechi Okoro arrived in Ijeoma City not in the sleek, tinted window convoy befitting the heir to the Obata Group, but in an old, beaten-up utility truck piled high with lumber and simple hand tools. He had traded his Italian suit for faded denim and his corner office for a tiny, sun-baked stall near the old market, an area Madame Hugo and her crowd considered beneath notice. He wanted to feel the city's pulse, to understand the ground his family's massive projects were built upon, and to find a peace that the boardroom chatter had long since stolen. Kelechi had a profound talent for carpentry, a skill he learned from his late grandfather, and the shop was not a costume, it was his sanctuary. He chose the name Okoro carvings and set to work, finding deep satisfaction in the honest resistance of wood under his plane. The dust, the noise, the haggling market women, it was all a symphony to him. It was real. Unlike the fake smiles and transactional greetings of the city's elite, the people here judged him on his work. Was the chair sturdy? Did the table stand level? That was his only currency. He intentionally wore clothes that were practical and worn, his hands calloused and strong, badges of honor he could never earn managing spreadsheets. His eyes, however, held a certain stillness and depth, a quality that hinted at worlds far beyond the small workshop, but only if one cared to look past the sawdust on his boots. His purpose here was simple, to live small before he was forced to live large, and to see which souls were made of true clay, and which were merely painted plaster. The moment Madame Hugo and her daughter, Amara, first saw Kelechi, they dismissed him with a single, sweeping glance. Their house, a gaudy, white mansion with fake Greek columns and manicured lawns, stood directly across the narrow street from the dusty carpentry shop. Amara, with her perfectly styled hair and constant stream of social media posts detailing her luxury life, found the shop an aesthetic offense. She would stand on her balcony, sipping an expensive, imported drink, and make loud, dismissive comments to her friends on the phone about the poor, dirty artisan polluting her view. Madame Hugo, ever the social climber, saw Kelechi not as a man, but as a symbol of the poverty they had barely escaped and now desperately wished to forget. Their life was a meticulously curated performance, constant parties, designer clothes, and an endless hunt for bigger, better connections. Amara's sole focus was to secure a wealthy husband who could elevate her mother's status further. She judged every man instantly by the car he drove, the watch on his wrist, and the neighborhood he lived in. Kelechi, standing outside his shop, covered in wood shavings, driving an ancient truck, registered as less than zero on her scale of desirable partners. "Mummy, look at him," she'd hiss, pulling her curtain shut. "He is trying to make a dining table, but his hands look like he has never eaten at one. He is so beneath us." The depth of his quiet skill, the precision of his cuts, the beauty of the mahogany and cedar he worked with, all of it was completely lost on them, blinded as they were by the superficial gleam of transient wealth. One scorching afternoon, a powerful windstorm ripped through Ijeoma City, catching everyone by surprise. It tore off a piece of the elaborate, poorly constructed roof over Madame Hugo's newly installed outdoor sitting area. Panic erupted. Madame Hugo shrieked, worried about her imported patio furniture, while her security guards fumbled, uselessly trying to tie down the flapping zinc. Kelechi, who was steadying a pile of expensive lumber in his own shop, saw the danger. He quickly grabbed a rope and a sturdy ladder. Without waiting for thanks or permission, he crossed the street and, in a matter of minutes, secured the loose sheeting with an expert's knot, preventing a more serious collapse. His focus was pure safety, not reward. When he climbed down, sweaty and covered in grit, Madame Hugo was already recovering her composure. Instead of a simple thank you, she waved a hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Ah, thank you, Carpenter," she said, her voice laced with condescension. "You are good with ropes, I see. Take this for your effort," and she flicked a small, crumpled bill at his feet, a tiny fraction of what the repair was worth. Kelechi paused, his eyes meeting hers. He did not react with anger, but with profound pity. He simply knelt, picked up the crumpled money, and placed it gently on the nearest table. "Madam, I do not charge for neighborly safety," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Keep your money for a better contractor." He walked back to his shop, leaving the money, the ladder, and the lingering scent of valuable mahogany behind him. The act of rejecting her paltry charity only angered Madame Hugo more. She felt scorned by a poor man. The dismissal only fueled Madame Hugo's resentment. The carpenter, in her view, was becoming too bold, too visible, and his presence was an insult to her upward trajectory. She decided the shop had to go. She marched down to the local council office, flashing her credentials and name-dropping her most powerful, but superficial, contacts. She claimed the shop was built illegally on public access land, a health hazard due to the sawdust, and a general blight on the neighborhood. She paid a small, discreet bribe to an opportunistic local official, Mr. Chitty, who promised swift action. Kelechi was ready when Mr. Chitty, puffed up with false authority, arrived with 2 uniformed local guards the next morning, waving a cease and desist notice. Kelechi listened patiently, his arms crossed over his chest, his posture relaxed. He did not raise his voice or argue. Instead, when Mr. Chitty finished his loud, dramatic pronouncements, Kelechi simply smiled and produced a set of impeccably organized, neatly laminated documents, the deed to the land, fully paid council permits dating back to his grandfather's time, proving the land was private and family-owned, and an environmental safety certificate. Each document was stamped, signed, and certified with the highest authority seals in the city. Mr. Chitty, seeing the quality of the paper and the seriousness of the seals, instantly deflated. The documents were too perfect, too legally solid. He mumbled an excuse about a clerical error and retreated quickly, leaving Madame Hugo, who was watching from her window, sputtering in frustration. The poor carpenter, it seemed, was better organized than her own well-connected family. What Madame Hugo and Amara could not possibly know was the true identity of the man behind the sawdust. Kelechi Okoro was not just an Okoro from a line of carpenters, he was the future managing director of the Obata Group, a conglomerate that had interests in half the nation's infrastructure, banking, and real estate sectors. The entire Ijeoma City land, from the airport expansion project to the new ultramodern mall they frequented, was either built, financed, or owned by his family's empire. His father, the legendary Chief Obata Okoro, was battling a severe illness and had given Kelechi 3 months to find himself before taking the reins of the dynasty. Kelechi's truck was old, but the phone in his pocket was a secure satellite link. The carpentry shop was humble, but the property title he kept safe in a wooden box was legally managed by the city's most formidable corporate law firm, Adewale & Partners, a firm that handled cases worth billions. His worn jeans covered a man whose personal net worth exceeded the annual budget of several small states. He had chosen this disguise to escape the pressure and the superficiality, but also to observe. He was a silent sentinel, watching the city's underbelly, understanding who was honest and who was rotten, knowledge he would soon need when he controlled the flow of billions in investment. The mockery he endured felt less like a personal slight and more like a necessary lesson, a confirmation that the world of glitter was indeed hollow. The annual Igioma City Founders Day Gala was the peak of the social calendar, a night when the city's true power structure was revealed. Madame Hugo had spent a small fortune securing invitations and an even larger one ensuring Amara was dressed in the most eye-catching, expensive gown. Their goal was simple: to secure a public photo with one of the most powerful, unmarried men in attendance. Just as Amara was posing near the entrance, adjusting her sequin shawl, Kelechi appeared. He wasn't invited, but he was delivering a custom-made, intricate carved gift box commissioned by the governor's aide, a small side job that required his personal touch. Dressed in his clean, but utterly simple, work clothes, Kelechi stood near the periphery, awaiting the aide. Amara spotted him immediately. Seizing an opportunity to impress her elite friends, she called out in a voice designed to carry across the marble floor, "Look everyone, the carpenter is here. Did you come to polish the floor, my dear? I hope you didn't bring any of that cheap wood dust into this place of class." Her friends giggled nervously. Kelechi paused, locking eyes with her. He didn't flinch. "I came to deliver a gift of true craft, Amara," he replied, his voice calm, cutting through the shallow noise. "A gift is measured by the thought and skill it holds, not the price of the paper it is wrapped in." He then turned and handed the box to the waiting aide, who greeted him with respectful familiarity, whispering, "Chief Okoro is expecting this, thank you, Kelechi." The quick, deferential nod from the powerful aide to the carpenter went unnoticed by Amara, who was too busy basking in her public cruelty to notice the flicker of respect. Following her public success at the gala, Amara finally attracted the attention of Chief Bako, a renowned but notoriously shady property developer. Chief Bako drove the fastest cars, wore the thickest gold chains, and spoke with an air of absolute entitlement. For Madame Hugo and Amara, he was the perfect solution, the ticket out of their increasingly strained finances and the assurance of a permanent elite position. Amara spent every day documenting their extravagant dates, reveling in the jealousy of her rivals. Chief Bako showered her with gifts, promising a lavish wedding and a life of never-ending luxury. He saw Amara as a beautiful accessory, and she saw him as a blank check. However, Kelechi, through his peripheral work in the community, heard whispers. The small-time traders and honest construction workers knew Chief Bako for his ruthless tactics, underpaying laborers, cutting corners on materials, and acquiring land through questionable, often fraudulent means. Kelechi even noticed Chief Bako's crew using suspiciously cheap, low-grade lumber from a supplier he knew was illegal. He recognized the pattern of a house built on sand. Kelechi knew, through his privileged contacts, that Chief Bako was being closely monitored by state and federal regulators for massive financial irregularities concerning a proposed housing estate, the very estate Madame Hugo had just invested all her remaining capital into, based on Bako's charm. Kelechi's mind, trained by corporate vigilance, saw the storm gathering, a slow, inevitable vortex ready to suck in Bako's naive fiancée and her family. Chief Bako's biggest, most ambitious project was a luxury waterfront development. To finance it, he had coerced Madame Hugo into signing over the deeds to two of her most valuable properties as collateral for a short-term, high-interest loan from a small, private finance house. Bako assured her this was just a formality and that the properties would be returned within weeks once the main investment came through. Blinded by the promise of Bako's wealth and Amara's impending status change, Madame Hugo signed without consulting her old, cautious lawyer, ignoring the tiny, critical print. That fine print was a death trap. Kelechi, working late one night, overheard a hushed conversation between two minor figures who worked for Bako, a conversation about how the two properties Madame Hugo signed away were built on land that the Obata Group had secured a legal right-of-way over decades ago for a future public project. Bako knew this and was banking on the fact that the government had never enforced the right-of-way, meaning he could take the land from Hugo, use the loan, and then disappear, leaving the finance company to deal with the inevitable legal mess from the Obata Group. Kelechi understood instantly that Bako was setting Madame Hugo up to lose everything, making her the scapegoat for a massive property fraud, a move so cynical it made his blood run cold. The first sign of the impending disaster was not a loud police siren, but a quiet, formal letter delivered by a grim-faced courier to Madame Hugo's mansion. It was a freezing order on all her remaining non-collateralized assets, issued by a small, unknown regional court on behalf of creditors of the Igioma waterfront project. Madame Hugo laughed, initially. She was too important for a small court order. She called Chief Bako, but his line went straight to voicemail. She called her banker, who stammered excuses and said he could no longer speak on the matter. the laughter died in her throat. Amara, meanwhile, was experiencing her own subtle crisis. Her expensive credit cards, which Chief Bako had promised to take care of, were suddenly being declined at every luxury boutique. The sales assistants, who once treated her like royalty, now looked at her with thinly veiled pity and annoyance. The illusion was cracking, and the cold air of reality rushed in. Madame Hugo, panicked, went to her safe deposit box to retrieve emergency cash, only to find it nearly empty, having been drained by Bako's last-minute, urgent investment opportunity. In a moment of pure desperation, she caught sight of Kelechi's shop across the road. The man was calmly sanding a beautiful, intricate cabinet, his life simple, steady, and utterly unaffected by the sudden panic gripping her wealthy world. The anxiety became too much. Madame Hugo finally broke her pride and drove down to the one lawyer she trusted, an old family friend, Mama Ao, who lived in a much humbler part of the city. Mama Ao looked over the loan documents with a frown, her face sinking with every paragraph she read. "Hugo, you have been tricked," she said gently. "This man Bako has hung you out to dry. The properties are lost unless a legal power far greater than this regional court intervenes." As Madame Ao spoke, Kelechi, who was delivering a custom-made bookshelf to the lawyer's home, walked past the open door. He saw Madame Hugo's distraught face and the grim documents on the table. He paused, knowing he should not interfere, but his conscience overruled his disguise. He walked in. "Mama Ao, I apologize," he said respectfully, bowing slightly. Then, looking directly at Madame Hugo, he said, "Madam, I often tell my customers, a structure built on a crooked foundation, no matter how much paint you put on it, will always fall. Look closely at the ground beneath your feet, not just the ceiling above your head." He said nothing more, simply delivering the shelf and leaving. Madame Hugo stared after him, infuriated that the carpenter thought he could give her business advice. Mama Ao, however, watched Kelechi go and said, "Hugo, that young man, Kelechi, speaks the truth. His grandfather was a man of great foresight. Pay attention to the ground." But Madame Hugo, still fixated on her former social status, refused to listen to either of them. The Ijeoma waterfront project, Chief Bako's crown jewel, was meant to be his legacy. It was scheduled for a massive official groundbreaking ceremony. Madame Hugo and Amara were planning their triumphant attendance, certain that Bako would make a grand public gesture toward Amara. But the day before the ceremony, the news broke like a thunderclap. The entire project was halted by a massive federal injunction, followed by an immediate press conference held by the powerful Minister of Infrastructure. The minister condemned Bako's company, citing years of financial malpractice, gross environmental violations, and the illegal seizure of public land. The TV screens in Madame Hugo's living room, which usually displayed fashion channels and celebrity gossip, were filled with images of police sealing off Bako's offices. Amara watched in horror as reporters described Bako as one of the nation's most wanted financial fugitives. All the gifts, the promises, the luxury, it was all debt and deception. Amara's phone, usually buzzing with flattering messages, went silent. Her powerful friend suddenly had emergencies and could not answer her calls. Madame Hugo stared at the television, her manicured fingers clutching her chest, a soundless scream trapped in her throat. The man they had laughed at, the simple carpenter, had warned them about the foundation, and now the entire structure of their future was crumbling. Kelechi sat in his shop, quietly listening to the market chatter. He didn't need the news channels, the fear and excitement in the people's voices told him everything. He knew Bako's downfall was not a random event. It was a coordinated, quiet strike by the highest echelons of government and corporate law. He had been a silent contributor to the operation, providing key, decades-old zoning documents from the Obata Group archives that proved Bako's land titles were fraudulent. Kelechi had been working his secret network, coordinating with federal investigators to ensure the cleanup was thorough. His mobile phone, the simple, dusty one he kept hidden in a drawer, rang. It was an encrypted call from the Inspector General of Police, a man who referred to Kelechi only as Boss Jr. The Inspector General confirmed Bako had fled, and that the investigation was now focusing on Bako's local collaborators and financial backers. "The trail leads to a Madame Hugo, sir," the IG stated. "She signed off on critical collateral. We have an order for her arrest." Kelechi took a deep, weary breath. He felt no triumph, only a heavy sadness. He had hoped they would escape Bako's web, but their greed had tethered them too tightly. He told the IG to proceed with the law, but to treat them with professional respect. He knew the lesson had to be learned, and the law was the harshest teacher. The knock on Madame Hugo's door was sharp, formal, and utterly final. It wasn't the gentle greeting of a visitor, but the sound of iron meeting wood. Two stern-faced officers from the Economic Crimes Unit stood on her doorstep. They were polite but unyielding. They produced the warrant, stating the charges clearly. Madame Hugo tried to argue, to drop the names of her important friends, but the officers simply looked through her, their gaze confirming her utter lack of real influence. They led her away in silence, Amara screaming and crying behind them, clutching a handbag that suddenly felt useless. At the station, the humiliation was absolute. Madame Hugo and Amara were processed, stripped of their jewelry and phones, and placed in separate cells. This was the moment that would define their lives forever, the moment the curtain fell on their performance. Amara, locked away, began to hyperventilate. The air was thick, the silence between the officers and the accused was deafening. Madame Hugo, watching her elaborate world dissolve, felt her internal strength buckle. She realized all the wealth she chased was imaginary. She saw the true power of law and order, and she saw how utterly disposable she was to the powerful people she thought were her friends. The reality of the bars, the stench, and the cold concrete taught her more in 1 hour than a lifetime of luxury had. News of Madame Hugo and Amara's arrest spread through Ijeoma City like a bushfire. The speed was terrifying. Those who had admired them secretly rejoiced, eager to see the proud brought low. Those who had genuinely been their friends tried to distance themselves, fearing guilt by association. Amara's social media account, once a fountain of lavish photos, was now a public forum of ridicule and condemnation. The family, which had climbed so high, now had no solid ground beneath them. In their time of greatest need, their network vanished. Calls to their lawyer went unanswered. The pastor of their flamboyant church said he was out of town. The people they had lent money to, or helped secure favors for, suddenly developed amnesia. The silence was the most crushing punishment. It confirmed what Kelechi had always known: their influence was solely based on the perception of wealth, not on any genuine, reciprocal goodwill. There was no village, no community safety net, only the vacuum created by their own arrogance. They were alone in the city they had so desperately sought to conquer. Kelechi continued to work. He heard the gossip, the cruel jokes, and the general satisfaction that Madame Hugo and Amara had finally met their downfall. He felt the heavy weight of his secret identity. He could make one phone call, utter 3 words, and they would be released. He could make another, and the entire case would be misplaced. But to do so would be to rob them of the painful, necessary lesson. He saw their suffering, and his natural compassion warred with his sense of justice. He was not a judge, but he was a witness to their lack of humanity, and he couldn't simply wipe the slate clean. He spent the morning working on a complex joinery puzzle, a metaphor for the complicated ethical dilemma he faced. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. He knew his family, the Obata group, had the power to protect their reputation by intervening immediately, but he had insisted on handling this local issue himself. He wanted to understand the depth of their repentance before he acted. He recalled the scorn in Amara's eyes, the flick of the Naira bill, and the attempt to ruin his livelihood. The scale of the injustice was massive. He had to be sure they saw the value of a humble life before he exposed the power of his own. After 2 nights in the cell, a low-level, overworked junior lawyer finally arrived, sent by their old family lawyer, Mama Ao. The junior lawyer, a young man named Emeka, spoke quietly and professionally, devoid of the flattery Madame Hugo was used to. He delivered the stark reality: the case was solid, the evidence against Chief Bako and his collaborators, including Madame Hugo's collateral signing, was overwhelming, and bail was set astronomically high. "There is only one way out, Madame Hugo," Emeka stated, rubbing his tired eyes. "The prosecution is being very aggressive, as this case involves powerful state interests. We need evidence that the initial land acquisition for the collateral properties was never fully legal, that it was tied up in an older, deeper land claim. We need documents from the very, very top of the land registry, the kind of documents only kept in private, institutional archives. The governor's office is involved. The only organizations that might have that kind of leverage or those historical documents are the oldest, most powerful landholding families and conglomerates, like the Obata Group. Madame Hugo and Amara looked at each other, their hearts sinking. They recognized the name Obata. It was a name whispered with reverence, a name completely out of their reach. The lawyer left, and the two women sat in stunned silence. Amara, defeated, wept into her mother's shoulder. Madame Hugo, however, began to think. She recalled the lawyer's words, the oldest families and conglomerates. Then, she recalled the conversation with Mama Ao, and Kelechi's warning about the crooked foundation. A sudden, faint ray of hope pierced her despair. She remembered the aide at the gala whispering to Kelechi about Chief Okoro. Could it be possible? No. The idea was too ridiculous. Then, a neighbor, a humble seamstress named Sister Chica whom Madame Hugo had always patronized but never respected, came to visit. Sister Chica had managed to get a brief moment with Madame Hugo before the guards intervened. Madame Hugo, Sister Chica whispered urgently, the city has turned its back, but you have always been kind in a small way to some of us. Listen to me. The city speaks of power, but it is the small people who know the roots. Go to the market. Find the carpenter, Kelechi. He is not just a carpenter. He is different. He listens. He knows people. Not the big people you know, but the true people. Go to him. Beg him to use his local wisdom to find you a way. The guard pulled Sister Chica away, but the message hung in the air. The poor carpenter was now their only, most desperate chance. The next day, bail was miraculously secured by a distant, nervous relative, though the charges remained. Madame Hugo and Amara were released, but they were shadows of their former selves. The mansion felt cold and empty, their clothes felt like costumes. Their first necessary act was the walk of shame, crossing the street to Kelechi's shop. They didn't drive their luxury SUV, they walked. The shop was busy. Kelechi was intensely focused, carefully fitting a joint for a new door frame. Sawdust coated the air, and the smell of fresh-cut cedar was strong and honest. He looked up, his expression unreadable, and nodded a silent acknowledgement. Madame Hugo, wearing a simple wrapper and looking truly haggard, struggled to find her voice. Her chest tightened with the shame of having to beg the man she had ridiculed. Amara, standing behind her, looked like a defeated queen, her head bowed. The noise of the market, the haggling, the laughter, seemed to mock their silence. They stood before him, the epitome of the city's failed pursuit of superficial status, ready to plead their case to the quiet craftsman. Madame Hugo finally spoke, her voice thick and unfamiliar. She did not start with excuses or lies. Kelechi, she whispered, I have been arrogant and cruel to you and to this community. My eyes were blinded by glitter. Now I am stripped bare. I am not here to buy your services or your silence. I am here to beg for the kindness of the community I scorned. Amara quickly added, tears streaming down her face, I am so sorry, Kelechi. I judged you by your clothes and not your heart. I deserve this fate. Kelechi stopped working. He wiped his dusty hands on his apron and sat down on a sturdy, unvarnished stool, looking from mother to daughter with serious eyes. Your fate is not for me to decide, he said gently. The law will decide your guilt. But my help, if I can give it, must be earned not from me, but from the spirit of the community you dishonored. The Obata Group, which is involved in this land case, values justice, not money or influence. You want my help? Then you must go and genuinely repair the damage your actions and your arrogance caused to the small, honest people of Ijeoma City. Go to Sister Chica, the seamstress, and pay her the full amount Bako owed her for the uniforms. Go to Papa Emeka, the small farmer whose crop Bako destroyed, and promise to rebuild his farm. Do this, and come back and tell me what you learned. Only then can we speak of Obata's leverage. The task Kelechi set them was harder than paying a fine. It required the death of their pride. They had to visit those they had wronged or ignored, the poor contractors who were unpaid by Bako's shell company, the market women whose stalls were disrupted, the very same small people they had treated as invisible. Madame Hugo and Amara, led by the guilt of their desperation, started their journey. They walked the dusty streets in their simple clothes, knocking on doors in poor neighborhoods. They didn't just pay the debts, they apologized. They listened to the stories of hardship they had caused. Amara sat with Sister Chica, the seamstress, and learned about the struggle of raising children on unsteady income. Madame Hugo visited the farm of Papa Emeka, seeing the real damage, not just a business failure, but the destruction of a legacy. The money they paid was significant, but the tears they shed were real, prompted by the genuine empathy they felt for the first time. They were no longer seeing people as stepping stones or obstacles, but as human beings with dignity and genuine struggles. They were learning the true measure of community wealth. They returned to Kelechi's shop 2 days later, not with the energy of desperation, but with the quiet exhaustion of genuine labor. They recounted every meeting, every tear, and every heartfelt apology. Madame Hugo spoke of Papa Emeka's forgiveness, which she described as a greater treasure than any gold necklace. Amara spoke of the simplicity and dignity of Sister Chica's home. They were different. Their eyes were quieter, their hands were no longer restless, and the expensive sheen of their skin was replaced by the warm glow of humility. "We were poor inside," Kelechi, Madame Hugo confessed, tears welling up again. "Our pride was a bigger prison than that police cell." Kelechi listened, nodding slowly. He didn't speak of his identity, he spoke of the town. "Ijeoma City is strong because of these people," he said. "The foundation is the community. Now, I will help you with the legal problem. Not because you are rich or connected, but because you have proven you are willing to learn to be good citizens." He stood up, walked to his small, locked cabinet, and pulled out his discreet satellite phone. Kelechi excused himself and walked to the back of his workshop, the phone pressed to his ear. Madame Hugo and Amara watched him from the shadows, their hearts pounding in unison. He spoke in a low, even tone, devoid of the aggressive volume and posturing they were used to from the big men. "Yes, Chief," he said. "It is Kelechi. I need the historic zoning documents for the land under the former Ijeoma waterfront project. The Obata Group's original right-of-way documents from 1985. Then, his voice grew slightly firmer. "Yes, Inspector General, I am aware of the charges against Hugo and Amara. They have caused harm, but they have also taken steps toward genuine community reconciliation. My legal team will provide the documents that prove the fraudulent nature of Bako's entire operation, which will clear Madame Hugo of the conspiracy charge and expose Bako fully. The charges must be reduced to minor regulatory violations, based on their voluntary restitution to the victims. This is a matter of corporate justice, not personal ruin." "Thank you, Chief. Yes, I will see you at the governor's dinner tomorrow." He disconnected the call and returned, his face calm, not revealing the sheer power he had just wielded. The next morning, the legal landscape shifted violently. Emeka, their junior lawyer, arrived, breathless and wide-eyed, carrying a stack of pristine, decades-old zoning documents bearing the Obata Group's highest corporate seal. "Madame Hugo, Amara." "A miracle," he exclaimed. The Obata Group's in-house counsel, one of the most powerful legal figures in the nation, has personally intervened. These documents prove that Chief Bako had no right to collateralize that land. You are completely cleared of the grand fraud charges. The police are dropping the conspiracy charge against you. You still face minor penalties for negligence, but you are free. Madame Hugo and Amara collapsed into each other's arms, the weight of the world lifting. They were saved. But the question remained, who had done this? Emeka could only say the intervention came from an internal decision by the Obata family, orchestrated by a highly influential figure. The only person they knew who mentioned Obata and knew their situation was Kelechi, the carpenter. They rushed across the street to his shop, but he was gone. The shop was locked, a simple note pinned to the door, gone to deliver a big order. Be well. That evening, a major public function was held, the official launch of the new Ijeoma City Youth Entrepreneurship Initiative. Amara and Madame Hugo, now free but still low profile, insisted on attending the event, not to socialize, but to listen, to witness true power. They sat far in the back, humbled and anonymous, watching the stage where the state governor and the biggest business titans were seated. The governor rose to speak, thanking the corporate partners who had helped secure the city's future. And now, the governor announced, his voice booming across the hall, I want to introduce the man who is not only securing the future of this state but who personally oversaw the cleanup of the recent property fraud scandal. The true backbone of our partnership. He has been studying our community, living among us to understand our true needs. Please welcome the new executive director of the Obata Group, Kelechi Okoro. The audience erupted in applause. Madame Hugo and Amara froze. Time seemed to stop. Standing next to the governor, in a perfectly tailored suit that cost more than their entire house, was the quiet Carpenter. His hands, still strong and steady, were not dusty with sawdust, but were shaking the hand of the state's most powerful man. Kelechi looked completely at ease on stage. He was poised, articulate, and carried an undeniable aura of quiet, deep authority. When he spoke, his voice was clear and measured, the voice of a leader, not a craftsman. He spoke about his time in the community, about the importance of integrity, and about building futures on solid, honest foundations, not just in construction, but in character. Amara gasped, clutching her mother's hand. The subtle nod from the governor's aide at the previous gala, the reference to Chief Okoro, the perfect documents, the quiet, powerful phone calls, it all snapped into place like the final, perfect dovetail joint of a complex cabinet. Madame Hugo was trembling, not with fear, but with shame. She had laughed at a billionaire. She had flicked a tip at the man whose signature could command the entire city. The shame was suffocating, yet beneath the shame, a strange sense of reverence grew. She saw the true meaning of power, not the noise and the display they had chased, but the quiet ability to move the world without anyone knowing your name. Kelechi, the man they had despised, was the architect of their downfall and their salvation. He had not used his power for revenge, but for a lesson. The next morning, the Obata Group's sleek, dark convoy was parked across the street from the mansion. Kelechi, impeccably dressed, stood outside the now-closed carpentry shop, removing the final sign, Okoro Carvings. Madame Hugo and Amara cautiously approached him. Kelechi smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his deep eyes. Kelechi, Madame Hugo began, her voice cracking. I have no words. I insulted the man who saved my life, my family's name, everything. I am truly sorry. Amara's eyes were glistening. You taught us a lesson we will never forget. You are not a man of wealth, you are a man of value. Kelechi listened patiently. I came to this city to find myself, he said, looking at the worn door of his shop. And I found out that true wealth is invisible. Your cell, Madame Hugo, was not cold because of the concrete, but because of the emptiness of your contacts. The foundation of your life was built on lies, and Bako nearly collapsed it all. I did not save you with money. I saved you with the goodwill and the documents accumulated by a family that values honest work over quick profits. The Obata Group had the right-of-way documents because my grandfather, a simple carpenter, insisted on legal clarity. Now, you know the difference between having wealth and being truly rich. Kelechi handed Amara a small, perfectly carved wooden box, the same kind he delivered to the governor. This is a gift, he said. Inside is nothing but wood, but it represents the kind of honesty I hope you now value. You are intelligent, Amara. Use that intelligence to build something real. He gave a final, respectful nod to Madame Hugo. Your debt is not to me, but to the community. Pay it forward, Mama. Find your true foundation. With that, he entered the powerful black car. The convoy drove off silently, leaving behind only the scent of polished wood and a profound, life-altering silence. The carpenter was gone. Madame Hugo and Amara did not return to their old lives. The shame and the lesson were too deep. They sold the big, gaudy mansion, paid off their remaining debts, and used the small funds left over to start something new. Madame Hugo started a small, legitimate property management business, focusing on ensuring fair deals for low-income tenants, the kind of people she had ignored before. Amara, using her flair for style, opened a small, artisanal workshop, partnering with local craftsmen, including Sister Chica, the seamstress, and other honest artisans. She called her new venture the True Value Collective. She learned to appreciate the beautiful, honest craftsmanship of the furniture she bought from the market, seeing the value in the sweat and skill of the makers. Her social media was transformed, now featuring simple, elegant designs and stories of the artisans, not her luxury trips. The city, which had laughed at their fall, now quietly respected their transformation. The humiliation had stripped away the poison, leaving them with pure, honest ambition. Years passed. Kelechi Okoro was now the recognized titan of the Obata Group, managing billions in cross-continental projects. He never forgot his time as a carpenter. In fact, he ensured that all Obata projects prioritized local artisans and fair wages, always remembering the feeling of dust in his beard and the honesty of the wood in his hands. He and Amara never spoke again, but one day, he received a small, elegantly wrapped package. It was a small, perfectly carved wooden bird, a symbol of freedom and flight, created by Amara. It was simple, beautiful, and flawless. Attached was a note written on plain paper: "The foundation is solid now. Thank you for the blueprint." Kelechi placed the small bird on his massive mahogany desk, a quiet reminder that the most valuable lesson he had ever learned, and the most powerful favor he had ever granted, was done from the vantage point of a dusty, poor carpenter. The measure of a man, he knew, was never found in the height of his office, but in the humility of his posture. I hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more.